Well, the last part of last week and all of this week, we've been looking at the 7 virtues that Peter said should be things that we're focusing on in our Christian life if we're going to avoid sin, if we're going to avoid failure spiritually, and we're going to be productive, fruitful in our service towards God. And we've gone through that whole list in some very copious detail, and hopefully I'm giving you enough specifics that it becomes helpful for you. But we've talked about so far, just this week alone, we've looked at the issues of basically pursuing goodness, growing in knowledge, exercising self-control, in other words, saying no to bad things and yes to the right things, and then perseverance, hanging in there through thick and thin. And then finally, yesterday I talked about godliness, that basically we desire to have His imprint on our life that really comes from making the greatest pleasure of our life is to do the thing that God finds pleasing in His eyes. And so that brings us really to number 6 on our list of virtues, and that is the issue of brotherly kindness. Now, before I begin to address that, I better do something that I don't want to forget to do, because my wife asked me to do it. And when she asks me to do stuff, I try not to forget, although I often do. But my T-shirt, you may be looking, I don't know if you noticed it, you can see it in camera, it's got a little, wiener dog on it, and it says underneath it, Seaside. And on the back, it has a big emblem, from most T-shirts do. But Seaside is a small beach town on the Florida Emerald Coast, which is the Gulf side of the coast. And my wife and I, over the last few years, we've been going down there sometimes twice a year. Beautiful beaches. We love it there. But Seaside, by the way, just a point of interest, is where the movie The Truman Show was filmed. And so if you ever watch The Truman Show and you see this idyllic little community, it actually looks just like that. This is a real place. They couldn't have picked a better place. And I would love to live there, but I don't have the multiple millions of dollars it costs to live in that community. But it's a really beautiful place. And so she wanted me to mention it, because when we go there, Florida, we go oftentimes with my son and his family. We do this T-shirt thing. Me and the 2 boys, get matching T-shirts or sweatshirts, and we do this photo shoot. And then my wife and my granddaughter do a photo shoot with matching T-shirts or sweatshirts. It's kind of a thing we do, and then we often show up on in family photos. So basically, this was a T-shirt this year that my oldest grandson, who's 13, picked out for us to wear to be emblematic. He always picks the shirt that we're going to wear every year, so this is the one. Long story to tell you a piece of trivia that you'll probably want to forget as soon as possible. But as we get back to talking about the virtues, part of the virtues is this issue of brotherly kindness. And this is an interesting virtue because, it's not something that is very prevalent in our culture today, simply because of what's happening to us culturally. We don't live in such close proximity to each other. And as I mentioned a couple of days ago, that COVID seemed to have really kind of created greater distance between people overall. And then you add to it the internet, that we can kind of live vicariously out there, having a different personality and not really being engaged. That's gotten so weird. I remember there was an attempt. I remember Facebook changed their name to Meta because they wanted to create the metaverse. And the idea behind the metaverse was that you could begin to do life online. You wouldn't even have to leave your computer. And of course, that was a huge money-making scheme for them. It failed miserably because people need human contact. As I've talked before, we need to be able to hug and touch and engage with other people face to face, look at them in the eye, and even if necessary, smell their bad breath. But the whole point is that we're made for human connection. And that's where brotherly kindness is one of the things that the enemy really tries to attack, because he doesn't want people to be deeply connected with other people. The word probably most literally translated would be mutual affection. And some have defined it as the love which Christ shows to us by where we cherish other people as our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I know the challenge. Not everybody has an attractive personality. Not everybody has a way of doing life that we have an affinity with. That's why we find that when we form home groups, usually home groups end up being affinity groups, that people find their 7 best friends and they hang out together. And because they share a point in their life. As I was talking with one of my children, we were talking about their situation. I was wondering, do you guys still hang out with so-and-so and so-and-so? And they said, well, we're still friends and we get together from time to time, but their kids are grown, our kids are small, so most of our time is hanging out with other people who have kids in the same age group. In fact, we looked at a little post my daughter-in-law put up with 8th graders in her house at one time. I thought, 8 kids boys between 13 and 14. My gosh, my wife asked, are they staying over? And she said, God forbid, no way. But the whole point is that that's who they associate with, is people who they have a lot in common with. And I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's natural, that's normal. But what's happened in our culture is, instead of families living in close proximity with each other, they're scattered all over the planet. And so, for us, we have to make quite a drive, or mostly fly, to be able to connect with certain family members if we want to maintain that relationship. But we don't have that opportunity to do it very regularly here. And so in the church, there are often people who don't have those kind of community relationships, and that's what the church becomes. What we found in our church was one of the most profound things in affecting that kind of community was when we created what we call our family center, where people could have breakfast together on Sunday morning. And, it's basically a free breakfast. Anybody that wants to eat can, as long as they behave themselves. But we have these things. We have 2 coffee bars and all these other things, where people can get coffee and donuts and hang out. But we've created places where people can just hang out, and by just running into other people and sitting down near other people, they learn to develop relationships and conversations. And it's amazing to me, because our church is a very affectionate, friendly place. And I remember for years as a Christian, as a pastor, trying to figure out, how do you get these people to like each other and hang out together? And now it just happens. And it seems like it's always been that way. But what was the key? Well, you have to be in proximity. Now, here's the downside. One of my little aphorisms is, people in proximity produce problems. So when you get into proximity with other people, you find that other people are messy. They've got stuff going on in their life, and sometimes they're easy to be around, and sometimes they're not easy to be around. And one of the things I find is that I have a brother whom we're pretty close. We live far away, but we're brothers. And it's one of the things that is inescapable, is we share so much of our early life together, and did so much of life up into our 30s, that the idea of not being connected is not pleasurable. The idea is that something is missing. There's a gap that needs to be filled. And I find increasingly there are people who are suffering from a depth of really almost fatal loneliness, because they don't have anybody around them. One of the saddest things for me was when my father-in-law, as I mentioned before, he was 99, he was 100 years of age, and I would call him every other day. My wife would call him every other day. We basically went back and forth. And it got harder and harder, because as time went, his memory began to fail, and he would tell me the same stories, sometimes 5 times in one conversation. But the whole point was that I realized that if I didn't call him, the likelihood that he would have a conversation with anybody in that day was pretty small. And I found that even the place where he lived was a residential place. He really didn't have a lot of contact, because after COVID, most of these elderly people stayed locked away in their apartments and didn't want to come out. They were afraid. And I thought how tragic it was. And that's why I said that he told me one time, don't live this long. It's just so lonely. You won't enjoy it. And I thought to myself, the enjoyment is really measured by whether or not you have a family and companions around you, people who love you and care for you. In a culture where people are becoming so self-absorbed, so narcissistic, even to the point of being sociopathic, where all they think about is themselves and how to advance themselves and to take care of themselves. There's no giving, no sacrifice, no serving, no humbling themselves. In a culture like that, you're going to find that we're going to have many, many, many extremely lonely people. And many of those people, because of their narcissism, are going to become very lonely, and very angry people, which will ensure that they become more lonely. And so one of the antidote for that is to become part of a community of believers. And it may not come easily or all at once. I know that some churches you go to, they're kind of a closed book. If you don't fit into a certain category or have a certain look or whatever, or you haven't been there for 20 years, you're just not important. But it's important to find that kind of community of believers where people will accept you into their community and allow you to be part of their fellowship. And they will care about you and they will know what's going on, because Facebook friends aren't really usually friends. They're just people who are on your follow list. What you need to do is have people that you can talk to, that you can pick up the phone and say, can I talk? Can we get together? Can we have coffee? Can we do something? Because that's really what we are created for. God said to Adam when he created him, he looked at Adam and he saw all that Adam had around him to keep him busy and things to do. And he says, but it's not good for man to be alone. And so he created Eve. So marriage is God's perfect answer to the issue of loneliness. And if that isn't completely working for you, like my wife and I do, you get a dog. But the whole point is, even with our puppy, my wife and I focus our enjoyment with that puppy with each other. I mean, it's like, that's the whole idea, because as once I saw on a plaque in Israel that I bought for my wife, it said, I like me best when I'm with you. And that's what we need in our life. Somebody who we enjoy ourselves the most when we're with that person. Pray for God to bring that person into your life. Be open to being that person for somebody who doesn't have somebody like that in their life. Somebody that they can just talk to. Well, we'll wrap this up tomorrow. God bless you and go in his grace.